Welcome to the Legendary Upside podcast. My name is Pat Carrain. You can find all of my content at legendaryupside.com. Today, I am joined by Chris Gee and Sackreligious. We're going to be talking playoff best ball, and we're going to be talking lessons learned, some of the early lessons learned. I mean, the tournament is like halfway done. So, maybe the lessons that we'll have after the entire tournament are different than the lessons that we have currently. But I thought it'd be kind of interesting to talk through where our heads are at 2 rounds into this 4-round tournament. Guys, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good.
Good. Yeah, I would say it's been kind of a bumpy ride here in the playoff best ball world, where we had a really weird round 1 where there was a lot of scoring, but basically the guys you needed were like losing teams, right? You needed Dak. Obviously Aaron Jones would have helped you quite a bit, and he went on to win. But this is a tournament where you're generally drafting teams that you think are going to be able to get to the conference championship game. Sure enough, the Packers go to San Francisco and they lose. So Aaron Jones certainly helpful, but now he's out of the tournament. You had big performances from CJ Stroud in round 1, which helped, but now he's out of the tournament. I had a Tua solo team that advanced out of round 1, a lot of Dak stuff that advanced out of round 1, and then was obviously completely dead in round 2. The Rams scored really well. I joked that during the Rams game, I was like, if the Rams lose this game, it's just going to take Juwan Jennings to advance out of round 2. Juwan Jennings actually had a decent game. But it was kind of nuts, where it was like so much of what you needed to get through round 1 was then immediately dead in round 2. And I had a lot of stuff, like really fun Ravens stuff, die on the vine in round 1, never got through because it didn't have any of those pieces. So this does feel like kind of a guy you need year, but it's weird guys that you need because, the 2 seed Cowboys had a round 1 exit. So it's just it's a strange year, I would say, for it. And then this past this past week, we had Josh Allen be kind of the guy you need. My Josh Allen stuff was cruising to advancement, but now, of course, it's dead. So any thoughts just kind of on the macro here on this playoff best ball run out?
I've got a 10,000 foot view because I know that for people who were drafting like I recommended to draft and how I drafted, if you got down a good amount of volume, you're likely in an extremely good spot with just a couple teams, which is kind of the whole point, right? It's one team is going to be the thing that makes or breaks your ROI this season. If you didn't draft a bunch of volume, the way that this year played out, you're probably kind of sad right now, and you might have no teams left. And that's just the nature of the beast, really, with playoff best ball. In that, yeah, we could take away the wrong lessons from this year and say, oh, next year, I'm really going to make sure I sprinkle in a couple one-offs for guys just in case they go off. They're the skeleton key that get me through each round. But the way that it happened this season doesn't mean that it's going to happen that way next season. Like, it could just as likely be that the Cowboys in this season, where they get knocked out in round 1, win. Well, the Cowboys are probably a bad example. They're never going to win a playoff game. But a team that has guys you need on it could win, in fact, in a round and then advance. And now you've got all of these super teams. And so really what we're looking at now, and I'm sure that, in round 2, if you were sweating your pods and looking, there were a pretty large amount of like entirely stone dead teams. I went through a lot of my pods and saw teams where, or pods where there's only 4 teams with a quarterback, and everyone else is basically dead unless they have a player that they got a nuclear performance from that no one else had, right? They had Mike Evans and no one else in the pod had Mike Evans. And they also had CMC, maybe advance without a quarterback, right? And so I think what you could be kind of misled into is, oh, I needed all these one-off guys to actually advance. But what happens in a year like this is the teams that do have those one-off guys and are just all over the board, not really fielding coherent rosters for the championship round, end up just having teams that are like min cash merchants in the finals. And you're going to have enough people that manage to sneak through a Baltimore SF team or, you know, a KCSF team or, you know, who knows, maybe Detroit goes to the Super Bowl, but you're going to have people that snuck those teams through. And in years like this, all that means then is those teams that get into the finals, it's kind of like how last year was, where almost no teams could field a full finals roster in the Super Bowl. And so if you were one of those 8 people in the gauntlet, your team's worth 5 figures of expected value. You know, the games haven't even been played yet. You got 5 figures of expected value. Easy peasy. And that's kind of how it feels like it's going to play out again this year. We're going to get to the finals. The cards are going to turn over, and you're going to have such a small number of teams that have, number one, the ability to field a complete roster, and number two, good players to fill out those 5 spots where I would hazard a guess that even in a 400-person final like the gauntlet, when you turn the cards over, if it's a Baltimore San Francisco Super Bowl, I would guess you have 0 Purdy teams remaining in it, right? You might have 1 to 5, I would say. And then you'll have, you know, Lamar has gone crazy. So Lamar seems like he could be represented in the finals a decent amount. But you're basically going to have, I don't know, 30 to 50 Lamar teams, depending on how well he does next week, and then single-digit amount of Purdy teams. And then the other 300-something teams are just stone dead. And so when years like this play out, you just end up with your few that sneak through having a disproportionate amount of expected value than if it was a year where everything plays out easy and people advance all these incredible teams. You might feel better because your team looks sick going into the finals, but then you're dueling against so many other good teams. Sorry if that was a long-winded response there.
No, not at all. I actually like, it's really good to talk about too the wildcard weekend. All the quarterbacks, like the ones that advanced in that first round, had suboptimal scoring for fantasy points. So like Mahomes, Goff, they all had like 15 to 16 points. Flacco, which is a guy that we were on a lot because of his throwing tendencies, had a minimal output. So you needed guys that.
Yeah, Daniel was busy today for this pod. He actually was, but for the Flacco recap.
And then here's the issue for us. We were attacking the gauntlet early throughout the whole entire quarter, like we're talking about. We didn't even know Green Bay was going to be the 7th seed. We didn't know the Rams were going to sneak in that early until like week 17, week 18. We're like, oh, they're finally getting in. We can finally draft some Rams, which I'm like, if that's a key lesson for me, is like, hey, maybe I need to slow it down on the front end, maybe pace myself more like Sack was talking about, which is, hey, maybe I'll do 30 teams a week or 20 teams a week and get my exposure over the course of the gauntlet opening. Because I was at the end, when I had a lot of my teams at the end had a lot of more information edge, and that allowed me to like get those teams going against like CJ Stroud versus Flacco, getting Jordan Love. So maybe there's something to like, I don't want to say barbell approach, but just maybe a consistency over the course of the contest.
I would say barbell approach, that's difficult because the contests start to fill, and like I got in 132 gauntlet teams, and I planned to max it, and I wasn't able to. And then in like, it's just like a lot happening. DraftKings launched all their contests, so I think in terms of like when I draft, one of my lessons learned is actually I might want to be like, I don't want to say done with the gauntlet, but leaving myself. I think I left myself like 50 because I got kind of busy at the end of the week before the final week. And so I went into the final week with like 50 teams left, and I got like 20 done. So I think leaving like only 20, knowing that there's going to be a lot of other contests. The Gauntlet 2 will open up once the Gauntlet fills, right? There's going to be other stuff, some other Big Mittens, that kind of thing. Plus DraftKings will probably have stuff. So I think, yeah, like for my overall portfolio, maybe I draft the most in that final week. But for the gauntlet specifically, trying to get most of that done before the final week, I think would be an improvement for myself. Yeah, I do think it's pretty interesting. Like, I guess, let me illustrate, because one of the things that I think jumps out is 2 quarterbacks, right? The feeling that I should have actually drafted more 2 quarterback teams is one that comes to mind. Sack, you mentioned it's probably not going to be any Purdy teams. It's like, well, what if I had just gone like Lamar Purdy and tried to play it a little bit more conservative in that way and get the benefit of, maybe Lamar loses this week, but then I get my Purdy team into the Super Bowl and I'm the only Purdy team, something like that. But I will say I have a team, and I don't even know why I drafted this team this way. I don't remember drafting this team, but I drafted Mahomes and Allen together, and this is in the gauntlet. And I think this was probably fairly early on because I drafted Mahomes first, right? But I've got McCaffrey and Allen helped me get there. I don't think this team advances if it's not an Allen team. I think it only advanced by a couple points. So, yeah, it advanced by like 2 points. So it wouldn't have made it without Allen. So I'm like, okay, so this is sweet. I've got this team that can now get into the final. But I have this other team that also advanced that's just like this team, but better. And so, like, I have a better version of this same team. Surely someone else does as well. I mean, this might not be the best version of this other Chiefs to the Super Bowl team out there. I mean, maybe someone's got an even better version, but I was able to get this one through with just having Jake Ferguson, Brandon Cooks. And it's pretty clean. It's just Chiefs, 49ers, Super Bowl. So this is the style of team that we were suggesting people draft. It is alive. It is a better version of another team where, I don't know exactly why I did this, but surely I was hoping they wouldn't play each other in round 2. I think it was early enough before we knew. Maybe at the time I thought the Chiefs had a chance to get the bye. I don't know. But you can see how, losing Diggs, Davis, Kincaid, Josh Allen, this team's just so much weaker, and it's going to maybe limp into the Super Bowl, but it won't really bring all that much value to my portfolio. And so while losing some of these teams really hurts, I do think we do want to keep our eye on the prize of building the teams that are at least like very live if certain things break. This team needs the Chiefs to go to the Super Bowl, which probably won't happen, but at least if that unlikely thing occurs, it's very live.
Yeah, and I would say, just to push back a little bit on you needed Josh Allen to advance week 1, but scroll down and look at your wide receivers.
Oh, was I not actually sharing? Yeah, I was trying to. So sorry, I think I was only ever sharing that one team.
Oh, okay.
Let me just show the other team real quick.
While you're setting up that, I mean, I'll just go through my teams real quick. And I have a Detroit, Jared Goff led, and Kansas City team that advanced all the way to this divisional round and was literally 6 points away from advancing to the conference finals. And that's with Jared Goff, who averaged like 15 points a game each week. It comes down to a couple of factors. One, how good your initial pod is. And then 2, the luck of the pod draw.
Yeah, you need a little bit of luck.
You definitely need a little bit of luck.
I had a Lamar CMC team in the original gauntlet that put up 89.58, went through my pods at advances in well over 50% of my gauntlet pods. Unfortunate, I just happened to be in a pod where like 4 dudes had CMC, 2 had Allen, and 1 had Lamar, and that was all she wrote. That team, if it goes to next week, because it was a Lamar CMC with good Ravens pieces like Zay Flowers, not just like the 3 dart throw Ravens at the end of the draft, Justice Hill. That one probably has like, I don't know, comfortably into like 5 figures of equity and probably like over $20,000 of equity if it gets to next week and the cards get turned over and there's no other teams with Lamar CMC, so that it's literally sometimes you just, it's better to be lucky than good. We'd prefer to be both. But
I think you want your luck to come through for you in the early rounds and then show up with the nuts rather than limp in and then be like, God, if Richie James has the game of his life, then maybe if he scores 50, I'm live. Like, that's not where you want to be. You want to get lucky to get that.
Yeah, or like betting on CMC to get injured in the first drive and Elijah Mitchell or Jordan Mason gets all the work or Kyle Juszczyk gets a touchdown. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Insane. Yeah, sorry.
So sorry, this was the other team I was saying basically as my team block. So this team here has Mahomes and Allen, and this is the team that I was showing the entire time, right? So what is alive is Pacheco, McCaffrey, and this weaker stack, Tony, Marcus Valdes-Scantling. So it has 5 to the Super Bowl with Mahomes, but it's not the strongest 5, especially since this is literally another one of my teams with McCaffrey, Pacheco, Kittle, Rice, Justin Watson, Marcus Valdes-Scantling. So I've got do I have anyone on this team that I don't have on the other? Maybe not. So it's
you don't have Tony. Huge loss. No Kadarius.
That's right. Okay, so that's what it is. So if Tony goes nuts, but I don't think you want to be in a position where you're betting, you're hoping your luck shows up where Kadarius Toney goes for 40 in the Super Bowl. You'd much rather that your luck allows you to get a team that wouldn't have advanced in most pods through one of the rounds, and then it's built the right way to show up in the final. Like, so much of this is you're flipping over the cards in the final, and what you want to see is a team that's perfectly constructed to take down that round. So yeah, so this team is the team that basically has my other team blocked, and the assumption is that if I have one of these teams, surely other people in the Super Bowl, if the Chiefs make it, will also have me blocked.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, because it's like, what did you sacrifice on that Bills team where you had Josh Allen? Well, you sacrificed being able to get Rashee Rice or Travis Kelce or George Kittle, right? Which you were able to get on the other one where you didn't take Bills. The other thing and this is more specifically like how the distribution of Bills players' points come, like, the Bills were such a bad team to draft at all without Josh Allen. Like, you should never really have had any Bills players unless you had Josh Allen on the team, because so much of the offense goes through Josh Allen that if you ever show up to a Super Bowl and you're playing the NFC side against Josh Allen, and you're like, but I've got Stephon Diggs. He's good for 5 for 42. Like, you're dead. I'm sorry. You're stone dead. So that was why the teams that I did draft with Bills were all Josh Allen. And then I would try to push Diggs and Cook and every Bill. I would just push them as far as I can and load up on skill position players on other teams to try and get, let me get an Ayuk and Kittle with Josh Allen team. And if you take Stephon Diggs, you can have him. I'm going to take the wide receiver 1 for the Bills, Khalil Shakir, in the last round. It's okay. And so I think that there is lots of not optimal decision-making around how people were drafting the Bills, where you were sacrificing so much, especially after they beat the Chiefs. It was like after they beat the Chiefs, that window was slammed shut in the original gauntlet of it was good to draft the Bills. It was probably still good to draft Josh Allen, but at that point it was draft Josh Allen, click enough Bills that you get 5 in the Super Bowl. And that's where you can do a smart version of what I think people are going to be drawn to, of I want a bunch of one-offs. It's what about a bunch of two-offs? How about you get, 2 Bucks and, 2 49ers, and, you'll get your 3 Bills, and that'll be your Super Bowl. And then maybe throw in, 2 Chiefs, and there you go. Now you got a bunch of players that are live to score points on teams, could conceivably meet in the conference championship. And that's really what we're advocating for, is just build it out like you're playing the nuts in the conference championship. In fact, I've got, let me see if I can find this one where it's this is the exact thesis of what we're trying to do. Yeah, this is the one. Let me go ahead and share this. So this is what we're trying to do, and I'll zoom in here a little bit. I'm rolling into the 3rd round with 10 live players, and whoever wins the 49ers and Lions game, I'm probably winning the Mitten 2. Because if it's the 49ers, I'm Lamar, CMC, Beckham, Aguilar, Mark Andrews. And if Andrews is active in the Super Bowl and I have CMC, Mark Andrews, and I manage to get this through, my worst case scenario is I'm, maybe chopping or finishing top 10 if it's just an unlucky run out for me, right? And then if Detroit wins, Well, then I've got Jahmyr Gibbs, Amon-Ra, Sam Laporta, and still all of these Ravens, right? I have all of the best pieces that you could conceivably get on both teams, and all 10 of these are live. So I'm going to roll up in my pod next week, and I'm probably going to be pretty close.
This is the filthiest team I've seen.
I'm probably going to be close to
This is a
100%
great team.
advance rate, right? So like, this is what you're trying to do. It doesn't always work out this way, right? But like, what I think the key takeaway for me is there are years where it really goes your way when everything just broke, right? Like for me, the way it would have all gone my way is the Cowboys managed to miraculously come back week 1, and I have all these Cowboys teams through that are supporting all my other teams. And CJ Stroud actually had a better week, against the Ravens, and helped to push through some more Lamar teams by compensating for the lack of Baltimore skill position scoring, right? Because I had a lot of Houston with Baltimore. And so when those things happen, it's like, yeah, I feel great because I have like double or triple the amount of teams live in round 3. But all that's happening now is the well-constructed teams are just going to be fewer and farther between it going forward in the tournament. So the teams that you do have that are really, really live just contain so much more equity in them. And so that's like, it feels bad when this run out goes this way. But it's like, I promise, if you just got 1 or 2 good ones, like just hang on for the ride because you're still very live.
Yeah, I had 36 gauntlet teams through round 1, and I believe 18 of them were not like I went through and I looked which ones were solo Dak or solo Tua, and I think that was like 18 of them. It was nuts. It was like I forget exactly if it was, but yeah, I think about half my teams were like literally I marked dead. They were dead for first, and then I got 6 teams of the 36 through this round, and again, half of them I've gone through and labeled dead Allen solo. So it has been the advance rates. It's one of the lessons learned for me is that like the advance rates don't tell the story at all because you're getting stuff through that's completely dead. And these are well-built teams. They're just Allen solo teams that, he put up a lot of points. He's out. They're not getting through. I had a team on DraftKings that was the only team in a 5-person pod with a quarterback. That quarterback, though, was Josh Allen, and now it don't have any live play. It easily advanced, and now it will be, making someone else's life easier in a pod next week. But I think as we flip over the cards on the pods, the stuff that you showed, Sack, is going to be extremely live to advance. The stuff that I showed, I think, will be live to advance. It's just who wins the games now. I feel like we're coming down to like I think maybe I don't know. I guess we'll see, but I think some of the pain of like, oh my God, I have the nuts and it didn't advance because you kind of needed pieces on the losing team to really get through, and then those don't help you. Like some of that has to be coming to an end because the pods are going to be so riddled with these dead Allen teams now too. And there's also going to be people showing up who've got Puka and Aaron Jones and all, and the Houston stuff and all the stuff you've needed to date. And it's like, you could be looking at pods that have like CMC and Jawan Jennings as the only pieces on them that are live anymore.
Yeah, right. Imagine if we knew if Ferguson and Puka were the guys you needed for all those Lamar San Fran teams that we wanted to draft. It'd be sick, but we don't. And I'm looking at my teams, Pat. I got 46 through to the divisional, and I got like 0 teams live because, like I said, it's a little bit of pod luck. I had a lot of Kansas City that was like smashed. I had all the 4 guys, right? Pacheco, Kelsey, Rice. I just so happened to have a lot of Dallas pieces. I had a lot of guys that are Detroit pieces that didn't score enough. Like I really like Detroit and I really like Dallas for those ancillary pieces. And they didn't score a lot of points. If you didn't have the certain guys like Laporta getting the 11 points in the first round or Gibbs with the double digits points as your running back position, you were hurting. You were hurting. A lot of those teams hurt that were really well constructed and still got eliminated. And this round, I'm watching that game, Buffalo Kansas City game. I'm going, man, Buffalo's going to pull us out. They're going to just pass it to Diggs right in the end, and they're going to milk the clock and win the game.
They did pass the Diggs.
No, I know that one, but I'm talking about the one where Shakir in the end zone. I'm like, he's wide open in the flat. I'm like, you got to kill the time, man. You know what happened last year, the other year. So I'm with you guys, and like I think Sack is dead on about this. Have a well-constructed team, and then be intelligent. Get your pot into the next round with a well-built team, and hope for a little bit of variance and hope for a little bit of luck. You know.
So I'm going to share another team here. This is another team that I have live in the gauntlet. This is my other team that I would say is live for first in the gauntlet, but it requires an even less likely Super Bowl, Kansas City, Detroit. This is Mahomes, Pacheco, Gibbs, Kelsey, Amon-Ra, Laporta, Ferguson helped get it through, Justin Watson, Michael Gallup. So it was Dallas, Detroit, with KC, Solo, AFC on the other side. I also have a Big Mitten that is a KC build. So I desperately need the Chiefs to make the Super Bowl, which they probably won't. And this kind of brings up the larger point. I think this team in particular, where it's Detroit, KC, I built it clean. You know, it's gotten here, but now I need this KC Detroit Super Bowl that like we're not going to get. And so what's the point of this? Because this leads me to feel like I would like to focus more on building out teams from the perspective of I really think this team's going to make the Super Bowl. And in that case, for me, I really wish I just like pounded Lamar a lot more in round one. And I didn't do that. I think it was like this weird thing where I was like, well, San Francisco is so much easier to build. And like going Lamar and then Debo and Ayuk is like it's less clean than if I do Ayuk and I can try to get Purdy and it's all just San Francisco and then have a few different outs for who makes the Super Bowl on the AFC side. But I really wish I had some Lamar. And the only way to get Lamar when things are this chaotic, right, is to draft a lot of Lamar, I think. And it's as simple as that. And I just really wish I had like just prioritized making sure I had the high scoring quarterback from the AFC that I thought was the best chance to make the Super Bowl. Here I am, and it's all Chief stuff because it was just so much easier to build. Any thoughts on that? And kind of just like putting your foot down and saying, I'm going to make sure my portfolio is overweight on this guy, even if the market is going to make it hard to build with him.
You brought up in my brain like three incredibly important points. And so I'm going to try and get through all of them before I forget them. But the first one is I think that it's human nature to want to build the teams that feel easier, feel like better teams. I'm going to reference an Eagles tweet where he said he really doesn't like taking any of the 49ers other than CMC because it's really hard to build a good 49ers team. And it's just this conflate, like your brain is not properly processing what a good team is. You're thinking through like, but a good 49ers team would have Kittle and Ayuk and Debo and CMC. And it's like, yeah, dude, that's not possible. So you just need to think through what do the best 49ers teams in the tournament look like? And if you can build teams that are close to that, you should probably be building them. And then, okay, so that was, I'm going to kind of rapid fire these and then we can go dive deeper down these points because I want to make sure I get through them. The next thing is, Lamar was kind of my stand that I took. I was over 30% Lamar early on in the tournaments before he got more expensive in price. And I still clicked him as he rose in price because I wanted to try and maintain that hugely overweight position. Because the lesson I learned from last year when I faded the KC and Eagles Super Bowl matchup was you get a lot of teams through. You're playing a lower risk style. But then just like you said earlier, Pat, when you get to that last round and you're flipping the cards over, when you flip the cards over and you've played this lower risk style, oftentimes you're flipping over a hand, like if we were calling them poker hands, you're flipping over one pair or you're flipping over high card. And the people that were willing to risk it and play those bye week teams. Play that bye week quarterback that you're like, this guy's going to the Super Bowl this year, but it's scary and I don't want to lose my teams. It's like, yeah, but if you did play that, you were willing to sit in there for that straight flush draw, and now you hit. And you're in the finals with a straight flush, and the only thing that beats a straight flush is a royal flush. So you're sitting in a pretty good spot. And that's kind of how I feel like you should be treating these styles of drafting. And so for me, I think something that I want to hit on for an article next season is being able to mix the way that you're drafting your teams in your portfolio and really like separating the way we view bye week teams. And it's the full 1 seed v 1 seed is the most aggressive, right? Then it's 1 seed v anybody is the next most aggressive. And then you have no bye week teams. And if you've got a good chunk of your portfolio in this no bye week team space, you can play this tournament and probably lose very little money, even if things go poorly for you, because you'll be the advance rate maestro in the first round, right? You'll crush everyone. And then just by nature of having a lot of bullets in the second round, you'll probably do okay. And if you're building thoughtful teams in that way too, you'll still end up with a lot of live players in the second round. Now you just run into those, 1 seed teams that did make it through that are probably going to be a little stronger than you just because of the nature of those teams.
But if a non-1 seed makes the Super Bowl, like if the Chiefs make the Super Bowl this year, like my more conservative approach of, building around the Chiefs. And I would say I built a lot of 49ers because it was easier to stack them. It was harder for me to see. Well, basically you had to reach on Lamar, which was the sharp move, but I wasn't doing that a ton.
Same.
So, and Sack's got us all beat now because he was reaching on Lamar and he was able to get some Lamar stuff through. And until you'd much rather be in the position that you are in, but the Ravens might lose, and then all of a sudden the Chiefs stuff looks awesome. But do you feel like in those scenarios, like if I make the Super Bowl with my Chiefs stuff, do you feel like I'm going to show up and it's going to be other teams that are pretty similar to mine? Whereas if you make it, you're going to be like, I'm like the only guy here that has this super clean 10 players live, Detroit, San Francisco, Ravens. And if Detroit goes off and loses, that's almost like best case scenario for you. You're going to show up with a super low owned Ravens 49ers stack.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that it's like because I have a bunch of KC San Francisco as well. Because if let's start talking about these as like buckets of risk. So highest risk is the 2-1 seeds, right? The middle risk is a 1 seed and anyone, and then low risk is the non-1 seed builds, right? If you are taking the highest risk bucket and you get it to the finals, getting it to the finals means you win in like a lot of outcomes, or at the very least, like you finish really highly, right? If you built a good team in the high risk bucket, then the whole tournament is get to the finals. If you built a good team in the medium risk bucket, which I would say KC San Francisco, that's medium risk bucket, right? You get that to the finals, you're probably going to have a sweat. But instead of there maybe being like 50 total teams that have players that could go through, and honestly, if Lamar has a bad game this week, if he scores, a lower amount of points than he did in this last week, you're going to see even fewer teams that can field a full roster in the 400-man finals in the gauntlet. But if you get through with KC San Francisco, instead of it being like 50 teams that are live and your competitors, you're going to have like 150 or 200 teams that are your competitor. And so you can still get to the finals and have an incredible amount of equity in a Kansas City, San Francisco team, especially the strongest versions, right? Where you've got KC, Mahomes, CMC, maybe you mixed in a Kittle there and you happen to get, Pacheco and Kelsey or Pacheco and Rice, right? If you got one of those, you're feeling really good. But if you just got one of the middling KC San Francisco teams where it's like, I don't have CMC, but I've got Pacheco and I've got Ayuk on it. It's like, yeah, I mean, like you're live, but like, what do you think your odds are against the teams that have CMC plus those guys, right?
Right.
So, and then when you get all the way down to the lowest risk bucket, now all of a sudden it's like, okay, it was, crazy thing happened. It was the Texans and Lions Super Bowl. And it's like, I know that people think that no one is building that, but like, I promise you, those teams were getting drafted. Like it was built. So you're going to show up in the finals. Neither of those are bye week teams. And there's going to be 400 people that can field a starting lineup, or at least a halfway decent lineup. And so it's those low risk ones. Instead of winning the tournament by making the finals, now you're in the finals and you're having to pray. It's like you're talking about the Kadarius Toney thing. Like, if Toney has the best game of his life, I'm so live. But instead, I'd rather have the bet be, if I get placed into a couple good pods, I win the tournament. That's what the bet is, right? I advanced round one. I found I got one good pod and the bracket broke my way, because you're asking for the good pod in round two while there's more live teams left in the tournament. And then round three, you have the least number of live teams left and you can have 10 remaining, like I showed on my team there. And then all of a sudden it's, okay, I got the one pod that I needed. That was my stroke of luck. Now I'm here in the semifinals, and as long as nothing terribly crazy happens, I walk to the finals and I've got all the combos covered for, 3 out of the 4 different game combinations that I can have. So,
yeah. And the other thing I would say, because you were doing a ton of Lamar builds, is that you did get your one pod, but you also didn't get your one pod on a team that was probably pretty similar to this. Like, you had some bad luck and you had some good luck. But because there's going to be one team, like you said, that kind of makes or breaks your ROI in this type of this type of portfolio, then you get lucky on one of the teams that's built with 10 live bullets, and it's Ravens, 49ers, and Detroit heading into this week. I mean, it's kind of all the luck you need. You don't need to get lucky on all those teams. I think, for me, it's like kind of, those builds, those low risk bucket builds. I have some of those for sure, but they were always kind of the room forcing me into stuff. Like, I have Jordan Love solo, right? Yeah. And so those are sharp builds because the room's decided you're not going to be able to do plan A. You pivot, you left yourself another NFC path, and you've got that maybe paired up with Detroit. So it's like, it's a bracket that makes sense. Green Bay, Detroit. That's exactly what we'd be looking at if Green Bay had upset the 49ers. Jordan Love solo. I've got that covered. I've got advance rate if they were to win, right? But I wasn't ever going in saying I'm going to build this super unlikely Super Bowl. I have a lot of Chiefs 49ers because that's one way that was an easy way to build 49ers stuff. And it was a medium risk way, where I'm trying to get through this bye week team, but then I've also got this high scoring team, good quarterback. These are all Mahomes quarterback teams, not Purdy teams. So that was kind of a way to do it, where I was taking on some risk. But I think next year going in and saying, I'm going high risk from the start. I'm going to force the issue on making sure that I'm building more of these high risk teams, where those don't necessarily fall that cleanly to you, depending on where ADP currently is. You had Sack, you were reaching some to take some of the Lamar, right?
In the early drafts, when Lamar was going in the 3rd round, I would click whatever 49ers people let me get in the first 2 rounds, and then I would always click Lamar. I was never doing a thing where I would deviate and say, well, now that I've got these 2 49ers to start, what if I did it with the Chiefs build here? It's like, eventually later, with the way that the room shaped up, it was like, Chiefs are your best out when you play Christian. You got Christian McCaffrey. Your best chance is play Chiefs and pray that the room lets all of them fall to you, right? And that's how you end up with a bunch of Chiefs 49ers stuff. What I would say for next season, especially if there's anyone listening to this and this was your first year really diving into playoff best ball and you got a meaningful amount of action down for yourself and you're feeling a little burnt because it just didn't go your way this year. Maybe you didn't have a ton of volume, but you drafted 100 or 200 teams and you're out of bullets now. I would say go in with a game plan of how much you want to be in that high risk bucket. For me, I opted into high risk bucket every time it was feasible. Whenever I could go high risk bucket, Ravens, 49ers Super Bowl, always preferring the Lamar side to the Purdy side. Because when you think about it, pretend it is Ravens, 49ers Super Bowl and pretend that you and I are allowed to trade teams and we show up And I've got the Ravens side, and let's just say we both have CMC, but everything's the same all the way down. But it's just 1v1 Lamar versus Purdy. Which side do you want? Like you're going to take the Lamar side every time. And so for me, that's how I ended up with less Purdy, because I played a ton of 49ers. I just played them all through Lamar if possible. And if it wasn't through Lamar, it was all through Mahomes. And if it wasn't through Mahomes, it was all through Tua, right? And just on down the list. And so I think that when you're making your plan for next year, it's just decide, do you want to play this contest so that if you make the finals, you're winning the money? Or do you want to play this contest in a lower risk way where it's like, I can make the finals in a lot of years. I probably won't win very much money, but I won't risk as much either. But I want to play some of these medium risk and low risk buckets instead. And that's the way I want to do it. And just kind of find the right balance for you and your draft strategy. For me, it was, I had a high degree of confidence that the Ravens were going to the Super Bowl and that Lamar was the quarterback you needed to win in the finals. And so I did it every single time that I thought it was reasonable to do it.
I was looking at a lot of my early Baltimore teams as well, and I'm like, man, how many of those teams had Keaton Mitchell? You know what I mean? So that's just a great point that you brought up, Seth. You had conviction on a player, you targeted him, and you targeted him throughout the contest. Me, when I saw your teams in the chats that we were talking through, I was going, hey, man, Sack's already got the nut draw on Lamar. I'm like, why am I going to focus all my points on Lamar in the third or Lamar in the early second? Because he's got them all in the third. I'm like, oh, I'm just going to start doing like more San Francisco-based builds with different AFC players, which obviously is not going to end up well for me. So it's just a great point that, hey, if you have conviction on a guy, no matter throughout the process, take him, especially if there's a new contest that opens up. And that's a big thing as well. Realize that there's a new contest. Nothing matters where his ADP was beforehand. Take him where you need to take him.
Yeah, I also think that, I was not in if you had asked me, Pat, how willing are you to go with kind of the high risk builds? I would say very willing. That sounds great. I'm going to be firing a lot of these teams, but I didn't end up with enough of it, or I probably ended up with some of it too late. I've advanced 0 Lamar teams to this point. So, clearly I should have, if that was the goal, I should have been drafting a little differently. I think one of the, when I look back is kind of a lesson. It's this idea of like, when you go 2 49er skill players and then you grab Purdy, it feels like you have all these outs. It's like now I just have the NFC covered, and I need to, because I need to cover a bye week. I need kind of to be getting some advance rate guys to help me get this team through. And now I can use 3 different teams, and I'm not having, now if Purdy's gone and Lamar's there, I would take Lamar. But I often would take Purdy instead of Lamar, as this idea of like, oh, it's going to give me more flexibility. But I do think that if you're not intentionally saying, no, I want to be overweight this high risk bucket that is going to give me the best chance if the bracket plays out this way. But when the 2 1 seeds meet each other in the Super Bowl, it's going to be very difficult for other people to have strong builds with those teams. And so that's the cleanest path to you actually winning the tournament, because you can show up and there's just like 10 teams you're really competing against. And it's the most likely thing to happen in real life that these 1 seeds play each other. So it's definitely a leak for me, I think, where it's like, no, you have to the room's not going to make it that easy, and the builds are never going to feel super comfy because you're trying to do something very difficult, getting through 2 bye week teams. One thing that I want to get your guys' thoughts on with this in mind is, when I was building out teams in the very early weeks of this contest, I drafted solo 1 quarterback. Like I was like, let everything fall where it may. I'm not going to try to predict which. I'm going to have amazing 2 seed teams, basically, right? I'm going to, if the Ravens end up with the bye, those Ravens teams are going to be dead. But when I look back, I'm like, man, that was actually an opportunity to just say the Ravens are going to get the bye, or the 49ers are going to get the bye, and build out really, really strong teams that correctly predicted which team was going to get the bye. Now, I probably end up with some like weird Eagles builds as well, because they look like they were going to have the bye in that early week. Things were different then, but but there's like an opportunity in those early weeks to actually build out that high risk bucket in a way that, maybe you have a little bit easier time getting that team to advance. Do you guys agree with that at all?
That's a great point, and I actually agree with that, because you think about it, Josh Allen was going undrafted, right? Almost in those contests in the very beginning, and I'm not talking. Obviously, he wasn't going undrafted, but like you could get him in the 7th or 8th round.
Yeah, you could get him very late,
and he put up an extremely high number of fantasy points in the wild card round and the divisional round, and he lost, but he got you at least through that first week when Lamar went off for the QB1 at 36. So, yeah, I mean, it's great. I usually tend to go to the opposite conference for the quarterback, so I have that option. But I think that matters less to me when I have Lamar. Like, if I think he's going to be the guy and he's going to be the top scorer in the Super Bowl, just give me any quarterback that can run really well and score a lot of points instead of these, like, trying to stack them with the high-value piece players. I mean, it's worth it. It's worth it, but I think there's some credence there, Stack these guys early with high fantasy points. I think it just makes sense.
Yeah, when I think through it, my initial plan of attack was I wanted to kind of treat it like I treated the ambiguity around the KC and Buffalo bye last year, where I drafted all of those as one quarterback teams. Half of them were dead and half of them were not. But I think the leak that I had this year was that I was framing it using that binary nature of the 1 seed from last year, when it wasn't a binary nature for the 1 seed this year. And I didn't, it was, you definitely could have had the Dolphins get the 1 seed. You could have the Ravens get the 1 seed. You could have the Chiefs get the 1 seed, right? Like, all these different teams could have gotten the 1 seed. Eagles could have gotten it. 49ers could have gotten it. Cowboys could have gotten it. Shit, even the Lions could have gotten the 1 seed. And so it's when you don't have that binary nature attacking it the way that I did this year and last year, where I'm going to draft them all one quarterback teams, half dead, half alive. The half that are alive have a disproportionate amount of equity to the equity I lost. So I'm cool with it. Is a leak when it's not binary like it was last year. And so I definitely agree with Pat that in the first week, second week of the contest, you do want to mix up some of that and take some bye predictions, which I did, but I only did it for my first 20 teams, for example. Only 3 had 2 quarterbacks. 2 of them were Purdy teams, so I got that right. And 1 of them was a Mahomes team, so I got that wrong. And then my biggest, I'm just telling my wife we can never go on vacation during drafting season again, because we went to Hawaii the next week. And that's the week when I would have been like, it's Ravens Super Bowl, baby. Like, Ravens 1 seed. And Lamar was still going in the 3rd round then. Like, shit, I could have had 50% Lamar, and I would have had him all with a second quarterback at that point. And unfortunately, I didn't get that, but I did my damnedest once I got back. And that's why all the Mitten 2s that I had have.
You have to tell the story before you show the Lamar team that's super live if they make the Super Bowl. no matter who they play. We can't feel sorry for your Hawaii trip anymore.
I mean, we can feel sorry though that the only Lamar CMC team that I had that made it through to last week got nuked because of pod luck. And I was drafting those in, like, when you could get Lamar CMC. I remember I was messaging you guys, I was messaging Crutches and being like, if you're not clicking all the Lamar CMC that the market lets you click right now, like, what are you doing? This is like, when that Super Bowl happens, like, this isn't going to be available as prices change, like. And it wasn't. And God, I wish that I'd hammered that a little more. So I definitely agree in mixing up predictions on the bye week teams, especially if it's not a binary situation. If it's a binary situation, I think you do lean into the, fuck it, half my teams are dead, half of them are crazy. I have the best 2 seed teams. But the more that I think about it, I think you really only want to do that when you have a high degree of confidence that the 2 seed and the 1 seed have similar Super Bowl probabilities.
That's what I wanted to get to. Yeah. Last year, I think as we look at kind of the year, what year was more similar going to years going forward, it's probably this year where there's not like 2 teams that are super, super likely to be the teams in the Super Bowl, and we're just not sure who has the 1 seed. That was last year. And this year it was like the Ravens eventually emerged as kind of the team, and then behind them it's sort of like, I don't know. So like having Chiefs mega teams was not that cool, and also available later. So,
Yes.
like in reality, the opportunity in those early weeks was to build Ravens mega teams, assuming they had the bye. And like, I was very jealous of the Bills San Francisco stuff that people were able to build in the early weeks. But if you were able to build Ravens 49ers Bills stuff, I mean, that was like the real nuts in the early weeks.
That's what I kept saying is I'm not worried about the Bills 49ers teams. I'm worried about the Bills Ravens teams. Like anyone that actually used Josh Allen as an advance rate piece for Lamar, like that was my biggest leak, was not doing that early. And God, I like if there was someone that attacked that aggressively, like they'll be the one that wins the gauntlet, like I would say with a pretty high, if someone hit that hard over the first couple weeks, like you'd have to mess up your draft so bad to not ship it if you had the
well, you need the Ravens
Allen
to make the Super Bowl.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, sorry, to go back to Ravens make the Super Bowl, another big part of like what's shaping all of our decisions, this is a probabilistic game. And because the Ravens had like an 80% plus chance of making the conference championship, and then let's just assume a coin flip, right? Let's say that they're on even ground with whoever shows up in the conference championship of their opponent. Okay, so it's 40% Ravens Super Bowl. Like, and when you think of the way that that draft games work, where if you're even with the field on Lamar, you're 16%. But I'm telling you that the Ravens are 40% to make the Super Bowl. So if you show up even with the field, do you want to have that position? Is that a position that you want to have? When the event that we think is going to occur 40% of the time, you're representing 16% of the time.
Hey, Sack.
Right.
Hey, Sack, let me ask you a question real quick. When you're doing the Lamar CMC double click, like if you're at the 101, you get CMC, you come back at the 301, you take Lamar. Who are you taking at the 206? You taking Kittle? Or are you taking like maybe more of an advanced rate piece like Amon-Ra?
I was trying to do it. If you could get Kittle, I would just do Kittle there. I had a good amount of like CMC Kittle early. Those ones died with, like Jag stuff, or they died with Keaton Mitchell. And so those didn't make it out. As the prices shifted and you couldn't get Kittle as frequently there, then I was doing like Lamar plus whoever I wanted. A lot of it was Tony Pollard, actually, because at the time, the Cowboys were like far and away the highest probability of showing up in the conference championship alongside San Francisco. And so it was just so clean you could get, and that was when Dak was going late. Dak was going in like the 6th round. Everyone talks about the Josh Allen in the 7th round. No one wants to talk about the Dak Prescott in the 6th round. Like it was the same thing, Yeah. And so I had that's actually how I got some of my Lamar teams through, is I had the Dak Lamar. And that's really what helped propel you through that first round. And then Lamar took it in the 2nd round. But yeah, I did quite a bit of Tony Pollard. That's how I ended up with 38% Tony Pollard early on in the contest, because he just felt like such an easy click there. And then I wanted to play it through, 49ers Ravens. I know the Cowboys are going to play round 1 because I'm assuming the 49ers have a bye, right? And then I didn't see a huge difference between Brandon Cooks or Jake Ferguson as like my secondary pass catcher option, because you're not getting CD that way, right? And so on all the teams that I went Tony Pollard, Jake Ferguson, those all advanced. On the ones where I went Tony Pollard, Brandon Cooks, those all died, But for me, the vast majority of it was just play it through the highest probability. Hey, it's Cowboys. And then when you don't get that, then it's order of operations. Like the game doesn't have to be that hard. It's like, oh, they declined Cowboys to me. Like, I guess I'll take Amon-Ra. And that's how I ended up with that build that I showed with the 10 live. It's like, Cowboys were off the menu, but Amon-Ra slid. And so now I get to do Detroit. And so again, like the landscape will change next year. We'll have different probabilities of teams making the conference championship, and teams will be different levels of relative strength to each other. But I think that if you're using those probabilities to guide your decisions, And then whenever we have an event represented as like so much larger than 16%, because that's kind of like your threshold. If an event is that much larger than it, just know that like you're crushing the field. You don't even have to be that good. You're just like, Vegas says the Ravens make the Super Bowl 40% of the time. I think those Vegas guys are pretty sharp. And you just click the Ravens every time you can, because you're going to have a hard time getting up to 40% of your portfolio representing Ravens in the Super Bowl. Like, even
well,
though
I think specifically as well, Lamar, right, in the Super Bowl, like if you're looking at Bills, you're looking at Ravens. I would probably say Chiefs as well, especially next year. It's like the guy you're going to want in those builds is that quarterback who's going to be, so likely to be the highest scoring quarterback in that Super Bowl, especially this year with the 49ers being on the opposite side. But when you look at like what the Chiefs might look like next year, if Kelsey's declining a little bit more, maybe they bring in someone. Rice is going to be. It could be very similar where it's like, man, I don't know. It's like, but I know Mahomes. Like I know, and that's what the way it was this year. Where it's like with Lamar, it's Lamar. If they're in the Super Bowl, you want Lamar. And so, if you ended up with like 40% Lamar and 30% Flowers or 25% Flower, like that's not a big deal. The more important part is to have Lamar, who's going to be the engine, and that's kind of how you want to make that bet. And I think that's, as I look at like, man, I should have been clicking way more Lamar. Just that simple, that simple framework. I love the way you're putting it. Like 40% that Lamar makes a Super Bowl. I at least want 40% of my teams to reflect, that Lamar is in the fucking Super Bowl. This is how we win. You don't want to show up to a Lamar Super Bowl without Lamar.
Yeah, it sounds so silly, but it's that easy, right?
Yep. Yeah, not only that, like it's a 2 of 6 shot, right, in the gauntlet to advance. Like we should have been taking more risk, higher risk, like Sack, because hey, it's a 2 of 6 shot to get into the next round. It's another 2 of 14, which is 1 of 7, right? So those are pretty good odds, especially when playing with all the dead teams, especially with the Dallas thing. And I just want to comment that's a really sharp play, Sack, and I should have been on Lamar more. And the best part about Lamar was even if you missed out on Zay Flowers, you still had Isaiah Likely late. You still had Nelson Aguilar late. You still had Mark Andrews coming in for this week, possibly, right? And Sack
Super Bowl hammer, Mark Andrews.
Yep, he's gonna celebrate like crazy. And,
right, and I thought I was sharp, right? Because I'm like, I'm mixing in Mark Andrews, but I didn't take enough Lamar in the first place. And the absolute carnage of this format is something that I didn't really have my head around. Of like, if you show up, like if you're overweight Lamar, you're overweight relative to 17%. You're not overweight relative. I mean, unless you're absolutely hammering him, you're not overweight relative to his odds of making the Super Bowl. That's going to be difficult to do. And so, when you just kind of let the market decide when you get Lamar a little bit in this scenario, then odds are you're probably not going to have any Lamar when it comes time for the conference championship, because so many of your teams are going to be done in round one because you just didn't happen to have Jake Ferguson or whatever. The chaos here is just so outrageous. There's such high variance. But I think that doesn't lead me to feel like, oh man, what a highly variant game. It leads me to be like, oh, if I want to make a stand, I really have to make a stand.
Yeah, and I'll say, like, no matter how much we toot my horn of like, wow, that was really sharp, Sack. You clicked a bunch of Lamar. Probably ain't even min cash in the Gauntlet finals, boys. Like I'm probably dead in the Gauntlet. I have 2 live teams left in the Gauntlet. They're both, I don't even think I've shared them anywhere because I don't like them. They're just whatever. One of them is a Jared Goff QB team with Detroit, the best Detroit pieces, and Ravens. But it's like, if that makes the Super Bowl, like, I'm probably chopping. Other people are going to get there with Jared Goff and Ravens pieces. And so it's just whatever. And it's very unlikely, in my opinion, that the Lions upset the 49ers. And so it's like, yeah, all of that Lamar that I had, there were definitely a couple teams where I think I had like 3 where I got, quote unquote, bad pod luck in the Gauntlet, where I could have had some pretty sick Lamar and CMC teams come through. The one in particular really chapped my ass. But for those, it's just like, well, I got fortunate in the other tournaments. I have 3 Lamar CMC teams in the Mitten too. And like, yes, that was accessible in that time boxed window. And so that's going to be more common when you go to the finals. But I'm just hoping through sheer volume of hopefully I get all 3 of those into the finals. And then I have all the different permutations covered that way. That's my hope there. And I got, a couple other teams that were really lucky in other tournaments too, where it's like, ooh, I advanced a 60-pointer this week. Like, that's pretty fortunate. So you just don't know where the variance is going to land on your side. That's why I do so much volume in this format specifically. Like, all of these best ball type games that we play are extremely high variance games with a pretty demonstrable edge. So I do think that you want to approach them from a volume standpoint. And it's why I recommended to people at the outset, like, if you've got, $500 you're getting down, like, do 100 mittens. Don't do like just a few gauntlets. You want have a bunch of shots on goal. Because if I had decided like I want to get so much volume down and, my time is too valuable to be spending it on mittens and little mittens, I probably wouldn't have as many live final shots as I have now. If I only did big mittens and gauntlets, like, I might be here, staring at my bags thinking, I hope this is only a minus 50% year for me, So you really want that volume if you're going to play these formats and play it like, if you're playing because you're like, I want to be profitable with this long term, like, I would highly recommend that you're doing it with volume. And I just remember the third point I wanted to make on that. Pat had like a great thing earlier. Yeah. When we're talking, and the barbell approach that G talked about, when you're entering these tournaments, earlier when we first were talking about this format at the very beginning of all this content, we had talked about like segment out your entries, maybe 20 a week or 30 a week or whatever it is that you're going to do and get those down in that window. And you're kind of time boxing yourself. You're time boxing your own entries in the bigger contests like the gauntlet. I think that taking that approach and consistently feeding yourself a diet of information from this is what the ADP landscape looks like. This is what my opponents are getting in rooms. These are combos that would be crazy in the Super Bowl. Like Lamar CMC in the gauntlet, really, really uncommon over the entire course of the tournament. There's a 2-week period where it was like, yeah, everyone has Lamar CMC, but that was also the 2-week period where everyone drafted Jaguars, everyone drafted Keaton Mitchell before Gus Edwards, right? And so when you arm yourself with that information, now like, okay, the teams that I'm up against in the Super Bowl, there's going to be a couple Lamar CMCs, but I can still potentially just hope that the chaos kills all those. And if I show up with Lamar Kittle, I'm still probably okay. And then also on the flip side, knowing like, man, if I show up with, Patrick Mahomes without CMC, but I have Ayuk and I don't have one of Rice or Kelsey, but I've got Pacheco, like, knowing that is dead in the Super Bowl, because it's like everyone and their mom could get the sick Chiefs San Francisco stuff, dude. So like showing up there with just the super watered down version isn't going to cut it in those medium and low risk buckets. In the high risk bucket, it's just a volume game. It's like, I will take every high risk shot you let me take because almost all of them are dead, right? They're all dead anyway. So like if I sneak one through, even if it's the worst version of a Lamar team, it might be one of 8 or 10 in the finals, right? So,
yep. Let me share another team here. This is a team of mine that advanced, got some pod luck, got only 68 points this past week. This is in the Mitten, and this advanced. And this team, I think should help illustrate a point. This team is going to just be blocked by Sack's team if it gets in. But I kind of am curious about you guys' thoughts on building teams that are like more. So this team is Lamar and Dak, and then it builds a very clean Super Bowl with Tony Pollard, Justice Hill, CeeDee Lamb, Zay Flowers, Jake Ferguson, Isaiah Likely. Then I tacked on Dalton Kincaid, even though Sack told me not to. And then I did Rashad Bateman as well. So I've got I don't know exactly why I went with the one-off random Buffalo piece, but I guess I'm curious on your thoughts here. Like, imagine that instead of all the Dak stuff, all the Cowboy stuff, I had just gone full Bills, and a build here where it's Bills Ravens. Now you feel worse about that with the Bills losing and everything, but like trying to play the Super Bowl with just one team. So going aggressively for, let's say, the AFC Conference Championship, especially where you had Lamar, we know so many of the points are going to flow through Lamar. We have Allen. We know it's very similar there. So they're going to be crushing. And, we don't know exactly where the points are going to be distributed, but you've got like the rest of your team is basically trying to capture those points. And then you're going to lose like half your team, but the other half will be alive because you've correctly predicted the AFC Championship game. Now you show up to the Super Bowl, you flip the cards over. 5 Ravens, no 49ers, or 5 Ravens, no Lions. Do you feel like that's just kind of not playing for first?
Correct.
You're dead. Or you think you're dead. There's no version of that where you're like, I've got the whole Ravens team and I don't have Jahmyr Gibbs, so I'm just basically dead.
It's death by 1,000 1v1s, right, G? Because it's like, it's not that one
100%.
person has you dominated. It's that between everyone else in the finals, this guy has you, but it's a 1v1, and your 1v1 is Bateman versus, let's just say it's 49ers, it's Bateman versus Kittle, and then, but it's fine because Bateman beats Kittle. Okay, well, now there's a guy over here that's likely versus CMC, right? Or it's Gus Edwards versus CMC. So like you show up and you're just fighting off all these teams and you're crushing them, but there's just one or two that have the correct 1v1 because you're playing against the field. If it was just one other team, like, yeah, you can show up with 5. So I would say, where this is really sharp is those ultra small field finals, high stakes contests. And I actually, the Dallas version of that, I thought that was a sick team. I even think the Dalton Kincaid tack on was fine. It wasn't what I would do. I would have done a different player, especially depending on when you drafted it. Because I
don't know when I drafted it.
Trip on this. Early when people were drafting the Bills, do you know who had the same probability of going to the Super Bowl, same conference championship probability as the Bills when they were 15%?
I don't know.
It was the Buccaneers, except they were like 3x to actually make the playoffs. They had lower probabilities going forward because they were a worse team than the Bills, right? But when you have 3 times the probability to actually make the play, they got just as far. And guess what? Baker Mayfield and Mike Evans advanced you even better than Josh Allen and any of his skill position players did, right? Like, I guess week 1, Josh Allen had a little leg up on Baker Mayfield, Mike Evans, but like if you tack Rachaad White on there, like you're probably doing just fine because none of the Bills' skill position pieces did anything. It was just Josh Allen gave you that score that you had to have in that first week, next to Dak. But yeah, I think those builds though are really sharp. I like those
in the very small stuff.
In the small stuff. In the large stuff too, if you did it as the opposite side of the conference. So you could show up to the Super Bowl and you're like, hello, it's me, Mr. 10 live in the Super Bowl, Dallas and Baltimore. I'm very open to those.
Yeah, if you do a 5-5 with the opposite conferences with both trying to get to the Super Bowl, that's totally fine. But doing like 10 from one conference in a large field like the Gauntlet, you're dead to win the whole thing. My favorite construction this year was more of a 4-3-3. The only problem was when I had my Baltimore team, I'd have a team like the Dallas Cowboys as my 3, which I'd have Pollard, Ferguson, and Cook. And then I'd have like, they're the 2 seed. Let me get the Rams so they won't ever meet, if they win. Because I'm like, there's no way the Packers are going to win, And then I'm like, let me get Puka, Kyron, and Kupp. And then have Lamar with his 3 guys, whatever 3 guys you want. And I'm sorry, I'd have insert one of those guys for a quarterback, obviously, as a 4-3-3, to fill out the bye week. But yeah, man, and you just be like, I'm feeling great, man. I got this team through. And then I go to my like sheet and see my 46 teams. I go, Baltimore 4, okay, dead. And I put over like, okay, well, Baltimore, dead. Skull next to it. Like, I'd be like, man, these teams would have been so sick if the Cowboys just won,
Yeah.
Story of my life.
Yeah. Zach, can you pull up that your Mitten team again? Because I'm just curious, like, exactly how you built it out with. Did you have 5 lions on that?
Let's see. I think I had
don't
4
think so.
lions. But,
So you advanced round 1 with only 4 players?
No, because I had Chiefs as well. Let me pull it up here.
You have Chiefs on there. Okay.
Did you have Pacheco? You had Pacheco, right?
I had Rice,
well?
I believe.
Rice. Okay.
Yeah, no Pacheco.
Because it is interesting to think, because like it's tempting, right? It's tempting to be like, as you sit here, you're like, man, if I just built out the Chiefs Ravens, then I definitely have teams live, the guys live in the Super Bowl. But that's a bad impulse in these big tournaments. But this is a team we all actually wish we had. I'm just curious about exactly how you.
Yeah,
got
I think let me go to the draft board, see if we can.
I think you have to go.
I have to
go around back. Yeah.
That looked like the quarterfinals, right? Yeah. So you got to go to the
I've got to go round back. Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, like that team looked like a 4-3-3 a little bit, honestly. Like it had San Francisco. No, or was it? What was it, Zach? Was it
No, it had players from 4 different teams.
It's Baltimore, Detroit, KC, San Francisco.
Okay, there we go. So it's a good team. Yeah, I had a couple like that. Just no Lamar.
I had a few teams named Very Fun Ravens, and then they would finish 3rd.
All right, there we go. So here's the draft. We'll zoom in here a little bit. Okay, so let's see here. So I'm out of the 1 spot, and I just double tapped the CMC Lamar, and then went to Amon-Ra. Now, why did I not do Pollard here? Maybe because I've got the Dak guide on this, or the Lamb drafter, Lamb fell so much here that I would assume that it was just because I didn't think I could get back the pieces that if I go Pollard here, then I might end up, getting totally boxed out of the other pieces that I wanted. And also Amon-Ra wasn't really falling to 13 here. So I think the impetus of like, well, I won't have very many CMC Lamar Amon-Ra teams was enough to make me do that. Then get Jahmyr Gibbs and Rashee Rice coming back. Rashee Rice at this point in the draft was like our 12th highest ranked player on our leg up rankings. And for him to go to 25, like I think all of us were extremely overweight Rashee early on. Yep. Him falling to 25, I was like insta smashing Rashee Rice. And then I get the Sam Laporta, Jared Goff, Odell Beckham, Nelson Aguilar, and then finish it up with Mark Andrews as my playoff hammer here. I did this a lot. I probably have this start like over 100 times in all my drafts, and I've got like 7 of them now, that made it through. So it's like, like we talked about on the, the high probability stuff, like don't be scared consolidating your bets when you see like the good path that's there, like especially when it's the high risk bucket, like as long as you're comfortable with the high risk, you should really lean into that because it's going to be hard. It's going to be really hard to get those through.
So your 5 in round 1 were Amon-Ra, Gibbs, Rashee Rice, Goff, and Laporta.
Yep.
And yeah, I mean, the Rashee Rice as an advance rate piece is pretty sweet. So obviously that took some luck with him falling to you, but you've got. I mean, that's truly the best of both worlds.
This was what else let me advance in this pod. This I don't have a nice word to use. This person taking Dak Prescott, Josh Allen, like God bless you
so much.
God bless you, sir. I appreciate you losing the game for yourself and trying real hard to win it for me. Cause like, this is just king donkey shit right here. Like this is the worst shit I've ever seen in my life.
He was the 1 seed, right? He was the 1 overall, right? He won first, right? And you got second? Is that what happened?
Yeah. Oh, he smashed first, right? Because he had Dak, Pollard, Jake Ferguson, Josh Allen. No one else could score any points. He had
Dude,
You soaked up all the points and you snuck through.
I just limped across the finish line, you know, next to this guy with a Stafford team and this guy who took Geno Smith, Tyler Lockett, Kenneth. Like this guy had 4 dead players round 1, you know. And right. Steph Diggs, this is a dead player too that you took in the 3rd round. Like
and the 6th team had Puka, and he had an awful primetime game, Monday Night Football game with the whole entire Philly team. You know?
Yeah. He got the Amari Cooper, Gabe Davis. Yeah. Like, yeah, I got. But this is what we're talking about. Like, did I get extremely fortunate in this pod? You bet. But that's what we want. Like, we're like, let me get lucky one time here, because you know when you can get lucky, when your luck has to come from someone else doing something stupid instead of a random event, right? Like if I'm relying on the stupidity of my opponents to make me lucky, as opposed to the random bouncing of a football in an NFL game, I would prefer to bet on the stupidity of my opponents 100 times out of 100, right? Like just let me have that, because if I'm waiting until the Super Bowl and I'm like, please, Kadarius Toney, like get on in there.
I mean, it matters. Like, how far along is the game? How educated is the field? You know, and we felt that people were probably not like playing this game as sharply as they will be in the future this year. So I think that's another thing. Like, if this was a different game, we would probably actually prefer to flip a coin on some of these more soft
exactly. And that's the big difference between playoff best ball and regular season best ball. Like there's lots of spots in regular season best ball where I'm like, yeah, just get me to the finals and let me flip a coin, right? That's more like what you're trying to do in that format. Where in this format, it's like I've made it to the finals and now I've won. That's the big difference.
Right. Well, let me just I don't even think this is a lesson, but I just want to share. This is my pride and joy, guys. Chiefs to the Super Bowl, please, one time, even though this happens repeatedly. This is my Big Mitten. And I guess just for any of the big tournaments, I mean, we talked about, you know, playing it a little more conservatively. Thoughts on trying to have some of this medium risk bucket in the bigger tournaments as well, because you're taking on like each entry costs more money and you would prefer not to lose that money, right? So it would maybe make a little bit more sense to next year, like firing my 1 seed plus 1 seed stuff more at the Mitten or at the Gauntlet, which, you know, is a very top heavy big final structure, even though it's 25 an entry, but trying to keep some of this middle risk stuff. And this is a very nice, I mean, I'm literally doing this just to show you this team. I'm pretending I have a lesson. This is a pretty pristine middle risk team here. Mahomes, McCaffrey, Pacheco, Kelsey, Rice, Brandon Cooks, Jake Ferguson, Justin Watson, Jawan Jennings, Kadarius Toney. I built this team probably like I probably built this exact team probably like 10 or 15 times. Like this was a very easy thing you could do out of the one hole, middle risk. And so this is one of the ones that I have live. I feel very good about this team if the Chiefs go to the Super Bowl. They probably don't, but this is also a higher stakes tournament where I think if I'm going to build this type of thing again, I do feel better about it in the higher stakes stuff, I think, than having so much of this type of build left in the Gauntlet where I would just so much rather have the more likely real life outcome in my portfolio with the Ravens build.
I think that's a super prescient point. And the one thing I would say is so much of it does depend on your draft position, what the room gives you, right? Like I don't think you're saying like, oh, turn down those high risk options when they're presented to you.
I'm not.
But it's when you can pick between the two and they're both, you're going to be able to build paths that are both great. It's a great version of both paths. And you're picking the road that's diverging in the woods. You can pick the path less risky, for those higher stakes ones. And again, like you can kind of expand that to your macro approach for all the tournaments. Like if you're a player where you're like, I'm maxing the Gauntlet and I'm maxing 2 mittens. And so I'm going to have like $5,000 in action down. And I do not want to lose $5,000. Like if I lose $1,000 in this, like so be it. But I don't want to lose $5,000. Well, then maybe you do it where your default is middle risk, you know, and then when you get gifted the like crazy high risk stuff that looks like, wow, this is really clean, like stuff is falling way too far, like now I'm going to pounce and do the high risk stuff. Then you take it. So I just think it's kind of finding that right balance and approach for you as a player. And I definitely think it's sharp to switch it up based on the format as well.
Yeah, that team right there, man, I've had like 15 to 20 times in the gauntlet. That same team.
Same team. Yeah, it was like a template build. And this was very much one that the tool was like, I don't think I probably deviated from the tool once on that build. This was a very much tool approved build.
It's a great team. I mean, can Mahomes score over 20 fantasy points, right? That's going to be
can he win a game? That's really what we want. But hey, me and Davis Maddock are going to be rooting just as hard for the Chiefs this one time. All right, guys.
Pour one out for Liam, right?
Pour one out for Liam. I mean, Bill's got a lot of breaks in that game, and they still, so you can't. I don't know. Now we're risking upsetting Bills after a rough loss. It was a rough loss. We feel for you, Bills. But I think we're going to get out of here. We have some content planned for the site coming up. I'm working on Dynasty stuff. Going to get a refresh of the Dynasty ranks out soon. Also looking at some early thoughts. Sack's been tinkering with an article and some early thoughts on way too early format. So we'll have content out for you on the site, written content out in the near future. Look for that. Good luck this weekend. Hope you guys are able to advance some sick teams into the finals of these various tournaments. See you then.